Microorganisms are everywhere around us, and their presence affects us humans and our environment in some very real and significant ways. In this video, I want to begin to introduce you to some of the microbes that are living in and on and around you. By the end of our time together, you should be able to describe the basic characteristics of bacteria, archaea, and protozoa. You'll need to be able to give an example of each and spell it correctly, as well as state what your example does. Does it cause a disease? Does it have some other role around us? You'll need to remember that for your exam. Any idea who this wigged gentleman is? This is Antony von Leeuwenhoek. By some, he's considered to be the father of microbiology. He was certainly the first to report the existence of unicellular life. He was a draper by trade, a fabric merchant, and as a fabric merchant he had a great interest in lenses, especially well-crafted lenses that would allow him to look at the nap of a fabric and how tightly weaved the threads were. He could inspect his wares and determine whether or not a fabric was quality or not. So as a side hobby, Antony actually crafted his own lenses, and after reading about Robert Hooke's discovery with cork, he decided to make his own microscopes. Now, prior to Leeuwenhoek's discoveries, the fact that life so small could exist was unknown. He scraped cells from the scrapings on his teeth, and remember, where he lived, people really weren't brushing well, if at all, so I'm sure there was plenty to discover there. He looked at pond water, he looked at his own semen, he looked at the cloudy material that formed when pepper was suspended in water. He basically looked at everything he could get his hands on. He called the small swimming cells that he observed animalcules, a portmanteau of animal and molecules. He published his findings with the Royal Society of London, and believe it or not, many didn't believe what he said he had found. So let's take a look at the animalcules. We're going to start with bacteria. Bacteria are small unicellular prokaryotic cells, and there are three shapes that we find most commonly. The first is called a coccus. Coccus-shaped cells are kind of spherical. Then you have bacillus. Bacillus looks kind of elongated, like a capsule that you might take or a vitamin. And then you have the spiral shapes, which can look like commas or corkscrews or like a little twist tie. The unique characteristic of most of your bacteria is that they have a cell wall made up of peptidoglycan. You can think of the cell wall as being a rigid border that's just outside of the plasma membrane, and it helps keep bacteria from bursting in their environments. Your bacteria can get their energy one of two ways. Some bacteria are photosynthetic, and we call them autotrophs. This means they take sunlight plus carbon dioxide and a little bit of water, mix it all together to make glucose. And as you already know, they give off a little oxygen as a waste product. Other bacteria absorb organic compounds like proteins, lipids, carbohydrates from the environment around them, and then they break that down and turn it into ATP using a process like glycolysis, for example. Your bacteria do a lot of things for us in the environment. They are major decomposers, so think about what it would be like if every fall, when the leaves fall off the trees, the leaves just sat on the ground until they turned into a smelly sludge. Bacteria help keep that from happening. In their role in decomposition, they also recycle elements. They basically take elements that are unavailable for use by plants and other organisms, and they make them available. Bacteria produce foods and medicines for us, and they're a major component of the group of microbes that are actually living within us, called the normal flora. Staphylococcus aureus, this bacterium here, or staph, is a type of bacterium that's found on the skin. You find it in the nares, the armpit, the groin, and in some other areas. Typically, when the skin is unbroken, these bacteria are harmless, but under the right circumstances, they can make people sick. S. aureus is the leading cause of skin and soft tissue infections like abscesses, boils, cellulitis. Staph bacteria can also cause more serious infections like pneumonia and bloodstream infections. Typically, people with weakened immune systems or people who've had recently undergone surgery or maybe they have implanted medical devices like central lines or catheters, they're at greater risk for the more serious staph infections. Staphylococcus aureus is spread by touching infected blood or body fluids, or most often it's spread by contaminated hands. As you see in this picture, Staphylococcus refers to the shape and arrangement of these bacteria. Staph bacteria are coccus-shaped, that is, they're spherical, and then they're clustered into grape-like clusters, which is where the staph prefix comes from. Escherichia coli are bacillus-shaped bacteria that are found in the environment, foods, and in the intestines of people and animals. E. coli are large, and they're a diverse group of bacteria. Most E. coli are harmless and are actually part of a healthy intestinal tract, but others make people sick. For example, some strains of E. coli cause diarrhea, while others cause urinary tract infections, respiratory illnesses, and pneumonia. The types of E. coli that can cause diarrhea are transmitted through contaminated water or food, or through contact with animals or people. Did you know that people have actually gotten E. coli infections by swallowing lake water while swimming, or touching the environment in petting zoos and other animal exhibits? Some people have gotten E. coli infections by eating food that was prepared by people who didn't wash their hands well after using the toilet. Almost everyone has some risk of an E. coli infection. Borrelia burgdorferi is the corkscrew-shaped bacterium that causes Lyme disease. This bacterium colonizes deer mice and is transmitted by deer ticks or blackleg ticks. But how? Bites. But you knew that, right? Ticks have a very strange life cycle. They go through 3 stages of development, but to move from one stage to another, they must take a blood meal. When that blood comes from a Lyme-infected deer mouse or other organism, the tick becomes infected and then transmits the bacterium to each organism it bites after that point. Early symptoms of Lyme disease include fever, headaches, fatigue, muscle and joint aches, and swollen lymph nodes. A telltale rash called erythema migrans occurs in about 70 to 80% of infected persons and may appear 3 to 30 days after the bite at the site of the tick bite. Later symptoms include facial palsy, so this is a condition where a person might experience droopy facial features or loss of muscle tone in the face, severe joint pain and swelling, severe as in it's enough to send you to a doctor's office and urgent care, or in some cases an ER, irregular heart rhythms, and shooting nerve pain. Sometimes people have problems with their memory, concentration, or sleep as well. Archaea are bacteria-like cells, so they look like bacteria, but they're chemically distinct. They may or may not have a cell wall. If they have a cell wall, it's made up of something called pseudomurine, And the unique characteristic for your archaea is that they're extremophiles. They like extreme environments. Types of extremophiles include your halophiles, which have a very high salt tolerance. These organisms might live in places like the Dead Sea, for example. You have extreme thermophiles that must have temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius. I hope you remember from chemistry that means boiling water. So they have to have temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius in order to live. You have extreme psychrophiles that must have extreme cold temperatures. So, for example, these organisms might live in the Arctic ice. You have acidophiles that need pHs around 1, and they only grow in extremely acidic environments. Alkalophiles live in very alkaline environments. And methanogens are organisms that consume carbohydrates from their environment and then they produce methane as a waste product. So they like high methane environments. Typically, your archaea help our world, by element recycling. They break down organic molecules in the environment around them, and then they release the elements from those molecules to the air or back to the environment where they can be used by other organisms. Archaea also produce chemicals that other organisms need for survival. They're involved in sewage treatment, and they're being looked at as potential sources for new antibiotics. In comparison to bacteria, the number and diversity of archaeal cells in the human body is extremely low. Representatives of only one phylum, Euryarchaeota, are found. This phylum includes 3 species, Methanobrevibacter smithii, which is found mostly in the gut and vagina, Methanosphera stadmanii, which is found primarily in the gut, and Methanobrevibacter oralis, which is found mostly in the oral cavity. For hundreds of years, scientists thought these organisms were harmless bystanders that produced substances that other organisms needed for survival. However, over the last 15 years, it has become clear that these organisms may be opportunistic pathogens. Opportunistic pathogens are organisms that cause disease, but only under specific conditions. Methanobrevibacter smithii is the most abundant archaeon in the human gut. In the gut, this archaeon breaks down carbohydrates that cannot be digested by humans, and it produces methane as a waste product. This methane is a component of human flatulence. Evidence is also growing that this archaeon may be an opportunistic pathogen. Methanobrevibacter smithii has been reported to be found more often in stool samples from patients with diverticulosis than healthy individuals. Methanobrevibacter oralis holds the distinction of being the first archaeon linked to human disease. This archaeon is found in and around the gums of only about 5% of healthy individuals, but it's up to 10 times more common, and it's found in greater amounts in patients that have periodontal syndrome. So your bacteria and archaea are prokaryotic organisms. They don't have a defined nucleus and they don't really have many organelles. Protozoa, on the other hand, and the other living organisms that we're going to talk about are all eukaryotes. They all have the distinction of having a nucleus plus a number of membrane-bound organelles. Your protozoa are unicellular organisms, and they live in aquatic environments like lakes and ponds. They live in the ocean, but they also lived in moist terrestrial environments. So in the fall, when the leaves fall off the trees and water kind of accumulates between them as they decay, you'll find protozoa there. They also live on tissues, which is more of a moist environment. Your protozoa have a variety of different shapes. They can live as free entities like the paramecium that you looked at probably in your Gen Bio or the amoebas. Protozoa can also be parasitic. So when we get to the chapter on eukaryotes, we'll look at a couple. The unique characteristic that protozoa have is that they are motile through 3 different methods. So motility means that these organisms are able to move themselves from one location to another under their own power. And they have 3 methods of doing this. They can use cilia or eukaryotic flagella, or they might make a pseudopod, which is formed when they send out a bit of their cytoplasm in one direction, then the rest of the cell kind of follows that projection. We'll talk about it again when we talk about eukaryotes. All of your protozoa are heterotrophs, meaning they're going to either hunt other organisms for food or they're going to absorb nutrients from the environment around them. Now, as aquatic organisms, these cells sometimes have difficulty with regulating osmosis. So they'll have special organelles like contractile vacuoles or pellicles to help keep them from bursting in their aquatic environment. A pellicle is a protective, thin layer of protein that lays up against the plasma membrane, and it helps give the cell some structure and rigidity. Protozoa mostly function in our world as consumers, meaning they're going to eat other organisms and debris, and protozoa serve as food sources for larger animals. Now let's have some examples of protozoa. The first is Naegleria fowleri. Naegleria fowleri. It's also called the brain-eating amoeba, but don't you call it that on an exam. These amoeba are free-living protozoa. They are normally found in warm, freshwater sources like lakes, rivers, and hot springs, and people become infected with Naegleria when they swim in warm, stagnant water and inhale Naegleria-infected water through their nose. Once inside the nasal cavity, the amoeba starts to eat away at the olfactory bulbs. Then the microbe creeps its way along the olfactory nerve, eating and reproducing until it reaches the brain, where it causes primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, or PAM. Early symptoms include severe headache, fever, nausea, and vomiting. And some of the stage 2 symptoms include seizures, hallucinations, altered mental state, and coma. Generally, people start to show symptoms about 5 days after infection, and then they die 5 days after that from brain swelling and necrosis. The fatality rate is more than 97%, but fortunately, infection with Naegleria fowleri is rare. Of the 143 cases of infection reported between 1962 and 2017, only 4 people survived, according to the CDC. Also, according to the CDC, your odds of contracting a brain-eating amoeba are about 1 in 70 million. Toxoplasma gondii is an obligate intracellular parasite that can infect most warm-blooded animals. I like to mention this parasite because it's an example of a microbe that has the ability to change minds. Well, brain chemistry. The parasite's goal is to live inside of cat intestines, since that's where it reproduces and completes its life cycle. So this means that when a cat defecates, the protozoan is shed into the cat's feces. When food or water is contaminated by cat feces harboring the protozoa, then the protozoan may find its way into a mouse or a rat. Once inside this host, the protozoan produces chemicals that change the rodent's brain chemistry so that cat urine becomes an attractant instead of a repellent. As a result, the rodent is more likely to hang out in places where it's likely to be eaten by a cat, delivering the protozoan back to the cat's intestine where it wants to be. Healthy adults may also become infected by this protozoan, either through improper hand washing after changing a cat's litter box or sometimes eating undercooked meat. For example, Frenchmen have the highest rate of Toxoplasma infection because of the amount of horse meat that gets eaten in that country. When horse meat containing cysts for this protozoan is consumed and it's undercooked so that the protozoan is not killed, then an infection can result. Healthy individuals may experience no symptoms, or they may experience cold-like symptoms upon infection by Toxoplasma gondii, but immunocompromised individuals can experience more severe effects like encephalitis, blindness, or neurological problems. Researchers like Robert Yolkin at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine have shown that for a minority of human hosts, Toxoplasma can increase the risk of developing mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Toxoplasma infection has also been loosely implicated in reducing inhibitions in some people. Pregnant women are often advised to avoid emptying litter boxes, as this protozoan is known to cause miscarriages, stillbirths, brain damage, and/or blindness in human infants when their mothers become infected. Let's do a little check to see what you remember. Which of the following is a eukaryote? Would it be Escherichia coli, Toxoplasma gondii, or Methanobrevibacter oralis? At any time, feel free to pause the video, think of your answer, and press play when you're ready to continue. Toxoplasma gondii, that's right. That's the only eukaryote on this slide. Which of the following is an archaeon associated with human disease? Is that Escherichia coli, Methanobrevibacter oralis, or Borrelia burgdorferi? Methanobrevibacter oralis, that's right. Remember, oralis sounds like oral, right? This is the archaeon that is highly associated with periodontal disease. Which of the following characteristics is common only to bacteria? Is it that they're prokaryotes, that they have cell walls made of peptidoglycan, or that they're found in aquatic environments? Right. They have cell walls made of peptidoglycan. This is one of the most important facts that I would hope you would remember about bacteria. This is the basis for why certain antibiotics like penicillin are effective at killing bacteria. Archaea are typically found, is that in aquatic environments, in extreme environments, or in terrestrial environments? Right. They are found in extreme environments. Good job. So in this video, I've described the basic characteristics of bacteria, archaea, and protozoa. I've also given you some examples of each type of organism. Remember, you'll need to know the characteristics as well as an example and what that example is responsible for your exam. In my next video, we'll consider other microorganisms like algae, fungi, and parasitic helminths.